The Imperium is a weak old man, ready and waiting to be broken apart by his vengeful sons.
The warbands of chaos would wreak havoc across the stars as the willing pawns of the ruinous powers. Primarily comprised of the inheritors of the traitor legions, veterans of 10,000 years of heresy would eke out an existence as carrion lords. Yet not all warbands would be derived from the stock of the corrupted legions, and bear the shame of once being drawn from the noble lineage of loyalist chapters of the Imperium. For today, we shall elucidate a Chaos warband who turned their back on the Emperor, despite centuries of service made faithfully in his name. The Marauders birthed from the conflict of the Badab War, the Red Corsairs. The origins of the Red Corsairs would prove to be a damning example of the incessant spread of corruption within even the ranks of the Emperor's noble Adeptus Astartes. Once known as the Astral Claws, the loyal Space Marine chapter would stand for 5,000 years as an honorable chapter bearing glorious deeds of valor. Believed to have been created during the 10th founding during the Nova Terra Interregnum, or Time of Twin Empires. Said to be formed to combat the rapid erosion of the Imperium's borders during a time of great strife, the crusading chapter would be dispatched from warzone to warzone in order to bring stability to the most beleaguered of campaigns. Adding their might to the defense of Cadia during Abaddon the Despoiler's 5th Black Crusade, the Astral Claws standard would be enshrined within Holy Terra's Eternity Gate for their glorious service. Fighting predominantly within the Segmentum Obscurus during the 37th and 38th millennia, the Astral Claws would sire 3 successor chapters from their ranks, though the names of such chapters have mostly been lost to history. For such a youthful chapter, the Astral Claws had proven themselves to be great warriors, yet seemingly be annihilated during the Altered Crusade, fighting alongside the Dark Angels chapter during 288.M38. Regardless of such reports, the Astral Claws would once again return to the front lines during their battle against the Gorgon Pentarchy 8 centuries later, and for their efforts be honored as among the most decorated chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. Saving the Executioner's chapter during the War of Stygia Aquilon, the Astral Claws would form bonds of camaraderie among their cousin chapters as noble yet brash warriors. Tasked with defending the Imperium from the forces of chaos, the Astral Claws would be honored with assignment to the Badab sector during 587.M41 as the commanders of the Maelstrom Warder Force. An assortment of chapters given the duty to prevent the forces of chaos from spilling from the borders of the Maelstrom Warpstorm, the Astral Claws had proven themselves worthy of seniority above their peers of the Lamenters, Charnel Guard, and Mantis Warriors. Thriving as the new overlords of Badab Primaris, the diligence of the chapter would be rewarded with resupply from the Forge World of Angstrom and further augment their capabilities as an already venerated chapter. Yet as the Astral Claws reached new heights of glory and prestige, the signs of their ignominious fall would begin to show. Their long-lost successor chapter, the Tiger Claws, would return to real space during 680.M41 within the Segmentum Pacificus after being subject to time distortion within their traversal of the warp. Declared an extinct chapter 14 centuries prior, the remaining Tiger Claws of 100 Astartes aboard their strike cruiser, Bakasura, would venture to their home system. Aiding the Stormwings chapter en route during their battle against Eldari slavers, the Tiger Claws would be resupplied for their efforts in aiding the Stormwings. Arriving at the site of their fortress monastery on the world of Crota, the Tiger Claws would find only a lifeless husk of their former world. Their chapter now but a distant memory, Captain Vitala of the Tiger Claws would travel to Holy Terra to petition the right to rebuild his chapter. Disappearing without a trace, rumors would surface that the Tiger Claws would be seen as tainted in the eyes of the Inquisition due to their long absence and attribution as among the 21st cursed founding, and summarily be expunged from service. secretly absorbed into the ranks of the Astral Claws under the discretion of Chapter Master Luft Huron, the leader of the Maelstrom Warders would allow the orphans of his chapter's successor to spread their bitterness among their ranks. Self-appointing himself as the planetary governor of Badab Prime, Luft Huron would appoint himself as the self-styled Tyrant of Badab, following a failed coup by the populace during 718.M41. As a primary recruitment world for his chapter and important stronghold for the Imperium, Huron would not allow for it to become ruled by weak souls seeking to threaten the Imperium. Further demanding his rulership of the entire sector on grounds of protecting the people from themselves, Huron would seek to emulate the example of the Ultramarines and their dominance of the Ultramar system. Lacking the authority of the Lord of Ultramar, Huron nonetheless still held high regard for his acumen as a commander of the Adeptus Astartes, and with his chapter's appointment as the leaders of the Maelstrom Warders, his authority would seem to be justified. Though initially lenient with Huron's methods, the Imperium would quickly grow despondent with his decisions. Foreseeing his leadership of a crusade into the Maelstrom, intent on routing the forces of chaos deep within its ties, Huron would withhold his chapter's gene seed tithes from the Adeptus Mechanicus and gather resources for his dream of conquering the Maelstrom. Restricting trade throughout the sector and hoarding its resources for himself, after 150 years of laxity, the Tyrant of Badab would invite reprisal from the Imperium. During 901.M41, an Imperial TIE fleet would arrive within the Badab system. Firing upon the fleet, Huron's actions would see to the dispatch of 2 punitive fleets following the TIE fleet's destruction. Calling a conclave of his allies within the Badab sector, Luft Huron would convene with the Lamenters and Mantis Warriors chapters and draft the Articles of Just Secession. Outlining his intention to separate the Maelstrom Zone from its neighboring Imperial sectors, Huron would proclaim their rights as Astartes, gifted by the Emperor, to be beyond the authority of lesser mortals. The Trade Lords of Carthago would beseech the Space Marine chapter, the Firehawks, of their plight, and 3 years following the arrival of the TIE fleets to the system, the Firehawks would investigate the Endymion cluster of the Maelstrom Zone. Under the jurisdiction of the Mantis Warriors chapter, the Separatist Astartes would board the Firehawks' void ship, the Red Harbinger, and slay the Astartes. With blood shed between 2 Astartes chapters, the Badab War had begun. For 9 years, battle would wage within the Badab sector as further conflict erupted with the intervention of further Astartes reinforcements. The Marines errant would answer the plight of the Firehawks, whilst the Executioners chapter would honor their blood-sworn oath to aid the Astral Claws for their aid given in centuries past. As the Loyalist chapters waned in strength, the Separatists would fortify the system and ready for further reprisal. The Red Scorpions, Raptors, Salamanders, and Fire Angels would enter the fray on the side of the Loyalists as the war entered its 2nd year. With the arrival of the Nova Marines to further counter the Separatists, Huron would form his Tyrant's Legion and further rebuff the Loyalist siege of the sector. With the arrival of the Executioners, a stalemate would last until the reinforcements of the Minotaurs chapter to the Loyalist contingent would tip the scales. Further emboldened with the addition of the Howling Griffins and Sons of Medusa chapters into the fold of the Loyalists, the Red Scorpions chapter master, Karab Kuln, would be appointed as the leader of the Loyalist forces with the loss of their former commander, Ferrant Ortiz. Further exacerbated with the invasion of Chaos and Orc forces during the multi-year conflict, the disastrous war would not end until the arrival of the Carcharodons and Exorcists would further overwhelm the Separatists. The Lamenters would surrender as their numbers fell to only 300 Astartes, whilst the Executioners would defect to the Loyalist cause, leaving the Astral Claws few of allies. Finally, during 911.M41, the war for Badab would be won in the name of the Loyalists. Within the Palace of Thorns, the newly arrived Star Phantoms chapter would conduct the initial assault of the Astral Claws stronghold, with their entire chapter strength brought to bear. Aided by Ordo Hereticus stormtroopers, the Star Phantoms would force the Astral Claws into a full retreat. Captain Androcles would critically injure Huron with a blast of his combi melter, with only 200 Astral Claws managing to escape the wrath of the Loyalists. The rebellion was over, and with time, the Mantis warriors, executioners, and lamenters would be put on trial for their crimes. Yet the Astral Claws would flee from real space into the Maelstrom. Their once symbol of disdain now welcomes the broken chapter into its embrace and would be their refuge for centuries to come. Recovering from his wounds, Luft Huron would rename himself and his men. Now known as Huron Blackheart, the Tyrant of Badab would rename his chapter into the Warband of the Red Corsairs and begin his quest to rebuild his tattered forces into an army to be reckoned with. Submitting themselves to the will of the ruinous powers, they would transform into the terrible denizens of the Maelstrom. Declared excommunicate traitoris by the Imperium, the renegade Space Marine chapter now roam the galaxy as they pillage and murder any in their path. Several decades following his defeat, Huron would emerge from the Maelstrom at the head of a vast Chaos fleet, intent on reaving the galaxy. Aiding the forces of the Thousand Suns during the Terran Crusade to combat the return of the Avenging Sun, and aiding Abaddon the Despoiler's fell 13th Black Crusade, Huron has forever darkened the fate of humanity with his continued acts of piracy, murder, and heresy. Following the expanse of the Great Rift, the Red Corsairs would besiege the White Scars chapter homeworld of Chogoris and capture their chapter master, Jubal Khan. Claiming the entirety of the Yasan sector, the Legion-sized warband would delight in their oppression of its people. The Red Corsairs would eventually be repelled with the return of the Master of the Hunt, Corsaro Khan, and retreat once more to their strongholds. Seeking revenge, the White Scars under Jubal Khan would attack the Red Corsairs space station of Sifnar, yet be captured during the assault. Torturing the Great Khan for solar weeks, the Red Corsairs would inflict so much trauma onto the chapter master of the White Scars that to this day, though rescued from his imprisonment, he is unable to fight in the name of his people. For should any be taken alive by the sons of the Blood Reaver, they shall receive no mercy. Embracing the gifts of the ruinous powers, despite the Red Corsairs' loss of Imperial resources to enable the survival of their forces, their new benefactors allow for fell rituals and means to replenish their numbers. Their gene seed degraded with time with its proximity to the corrupting influence of the Warp. The Warband's chief apothecary, known as the Corpse Master, Gareon, toils within his star fort, known as Hell's Iris. Tending to their depleted gene seed stock, the Red Corsairs' gene seed bears an extremely high rate of organ rejection due to its myriad mutations and flaws. Forced to steal viable gene seed from Loyalist Space Marine chapters, those Red Corsairs molded from the genetic legacy of their once noble Astartes are an affront to the Emperor's angels. Experimenting with rapid gene seed zygote cultivation, the Red Corsairs' original genetic primogenitor has been scrutinized by many inquisitorial agents over the millennia. Suspected to be of ultramarine descent, others speculate their origins to be of the Dark Angels due to their temperament in battle and lack of genetic degradation prior to their fall. Yet with the Edict of Obliteration decreed by the High Lords of Terror, all records of the Astral Claw's genetic heritage have been systematically erased from Imperial archives. Capturing both loyalist Astartes and wayward traitors alike, the Red Corsairs also recruit such individuals into their ranks should they have grown jaded with their former kin. The numbers of the Red Corsairs now rivaling that of the traitor legions within the Eye of Terror, the Chosen of Chaos watch warily at the upstart demagogue, now holding dominion over the Maelstrom. Ruling the world of New Badab, Huron regularly conducts tournaments dedicated to the blood god, Khorne, known as the Skull Harvest. Pitting Astartes of rival warbands against one another, the Black Heart rewards shows of violence and dominance with void ships should they be used to combat the forces of the Imperium. For the Tyrant of Badab's power continues to build, with some speculating that one day he may even claim the title of War Master. charged to protect humanity from the invasions of the Maelstrom Zone. The Astral Claws in their inception would be strict adherents to the Codex Astartes. Dividing their forces into 10 companies, the chapter would maintain their apothecarian and forge armories with great stability until the appointment of their chapter master, Luft Huron. Reorganizing his chapter significantly following their occupation of the Badab sector, the Astral Claws would exploit the sector by claiming stockpiles of armaments, equipment, and resources beyond the needs of a single Space Marine chapter. The advanced manufactorums of the Badab sector, fabricating Rhino armored vehicles to the point of carefree expendability. Such vehicles would be gifted to other separatist chapters of the Badab War to further bolster their bonds of camaraderie. Abandoning their limitations of 1,000 Space Marines in number, the Astral Claws would seek to emulate the swollen ranks of the Astartes legions of old during their war for supremacy. Building their strength to encompass 1,000 Space Marines per battle company into their fleet, the Astral Claws would grow to a size beyond any of their foes nor allies during the Badab War. Founding the Tyrant's Legion, comprised of mortal humans, these Astra Militarum defectors and Defense Auxilia troops of untold millions of soldiers would be commanded by a further detachment of 1,000 Astartes to defend the Badab sector from loyalist reprisals. The most egregious affront to the Emperor's will, the formation of such a force would demand further reinforcements to be dispatched to the Badab system by the High Lords of Terror. Used as an army of cannon fodder by the Astral Claws, the Tyrant's Legion would be willing puppets to their Tyrant of Badab in his crazed mission to secure independence from the Imperium. Assigned a Centurion of the chapter, each regiment of the Tyrant's Legion would be both awed and terrified of their imposing commanders and carry out their will. With the chapter's expansion beyond the bounds of the Codex Astartes, new specialist roles would be formed. During the final days of the Badab War, apothecaries tasked with harvesting the gene seed of their fallen kin would be attributed as corpse takers. Retrieving gene seed from friend and foe alike, the corpse takers' acts of theft further ensured the enmity of the enemies of the Astral Claws. Iron Hunter squads maintained the chapter's biker units and enacted flanking maneuvers and harrowing of their broken foes. Retaliator squads, though originally drawn from the chapter's reserve companies, proved especially adept at close quarters combat and specialized in spaceborne boarding actions. Led by Retaliators, these hand-picked Astartes revered for their brutality and faultless obedience would lead their squads to enact Huron's will against political dissidents. Yet with the chapter's degeneration into a warband of chaos, much of their tactics would remain. Lording over a vast fleet of battle barges, strike cruisers, and other void craft, the Red Corsairs now comprise thousands of Astartes, millions of cultist regiments, and labor serfs. The last remaining champions of the Tyrant of Badab, the Hounds of Huron, armed with scythed blades and chainsaws, whilst riding assault bikes to enact their master's will. Commanded by so-called Hunt Masters, these Chaos Lords promise great bounties of spoils in exchange for their service to Huron Blackheart. Only 4 in number, the Hunt Masters seek to undermine one another to gain greater favor with their overlord, and regularly track down failed usurpers to the throne of the Tyrant of Badab. Once a crusading chapter when loyal to the Imperium, the former Astral Claws had always shown an affinity to naval combat. Favoring rapid strike assaults and boarding actions, the Astral Claws would field more auxiliary assault bike and dreadnought contingents than many of their chapter peers. Relentless, fast-moving maneuvers leading to swift victories would feed the chapter's ego and add to their overconfidence when confronting forces far in excess of survivable odds. Stubborn in their unwillingness to retreat or regroup, the Astral Claws would pride themselves as the harbingers of the Imperium's cause and seek glory in the most desperate of engagements. Their prideful nature found vainglorious during the Badab War, the Astral Claws' loyalty to their chapter master would prove their most grievous of exploitable weaknesses. Unwavering in their dedication to their insane leader, their championing of martial glory would feed into Luft Huron's desire for power through bloodshed, and trick themselves into believing their actions to be beyond reproach. Setting themselves above the status of those they ruled, and any below the stature of a Space Marine to their inferiors, regardless of their rank. The Astral Claws, in their duty to protect humanity from the Maelstrom Zone, would disregard the will of the High Lords of Terra in the stead of their own authority. Resentful of their humbling with the conclusion of the Badab War, the pride of the Astral Claws would fester into a deep bitterness and loathing of those who had slighted their creed. Reborn as the foul parodies of their former glory, the Red Corsairs are wholly selfish in their desire to build an empire to which they shall be crowned as its overlords. No longer constrained by the bureaucracies and chains of the Imperium, the pawns of the Tyrant of Badab pillage and steal from every holdfast of the Emperor's domain in their attempt to build their doomed fiefdom. Yet there is only one ruler of humanity, and his angels shall not allow for such a tyrannical empire in his shadow to endure. Once clad in silver power armor trimmed with gold, the Astral Claws would stride into battle with their iconography proudly marked on their blue pauldrons. A tiger's head, emblazoned with gold and black, would symbolize their savage yet noble nature prior to their downfall. Their gloried visage now torn asunder and replaced with blood-red paint trimmed with black and brass, the Red Corsairs have completely supplanted their former image with jagged, brutal iconography. Painting over Imperial symbols with diagonal red saltires, the Red Corsairs delight in their flagrant vandalism of the Emperor's holy icons. Melting down service studs ripped from the skulls of fallen loyalist Space Marines, the Red Corsairs fashion the metal into their traitors' laurels as a mocking insult to the legacy and honor of their fallen foes. Now adopting an ebon-clawed gauntlet upon a field of crimson, the Tyrant's Claw of Huron Blackheart instills fear into the hearts of the innocent, knowing that no mercy shall be given at the hands of such malevolent raiders. Twisted in their reference to their once venerable heritage as the Claws of the Imperium, the Red Corsairs skulk the stars in pursuit of salvage and firepower to further bolster their stranglehold of the Maelstrom. Their burgeoning fell empire, a threat to all who voyage across the galaxy, and a constant drain on resources to the Imperium's war efforts. For though the War Master of Chaos, Abaddon the Despoiler, reigns as the supreme champion of the ruinous powers, he must be wary of the growing power of the Tyrant's Legion. Ever burgeoning in number, with a fleet large enough to rival his own, the Despoiler treats his subordinate with caution should a blade neatly find its way to his back. For there is no honor among thieves, nor loyalty among traitors, and the Red Corsairs have proven to be a force capable of thriving among the most treacherous of circumstance.
We burn their bastions and shatter their defense lines. We shall teach them to defy the will of the Tyrant.
This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. The Red Corsairs are a pox among the stars, fighting only to vindicate their frustrations and failures. Though convinced of their actions and right to carry out his will, their arrogance would blind them to their own failures and vices. Look to their example for the price of condescension, for there is no glory in rejecting humility. And to those who serve with diligence, honor, and modesty, they shall inherit the Emperor's glory.